Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 23rd of February 2025. This is a 5-day update because I haven't done one since the 18th. There's an awful lot going on, so apologies about that. I will race through this as well. Just the long and the short of it from the Institute for the Study of War. They are saying that Kupyansk, Chesivyar, Kursk and Kharkiv, they are the 4 areas, and Kursk, sorry, 5 areas where the Russians have made advances, although the Ukrainians are pushing back in a couple of areas. But the Russians still are making some advances, and it seems that they're pushing quite a bit in Kursk. Russian forces continue to deploy wounded and medically unfit soldiers to the front line in an effort to address personnel shortages, so it's not without issue. We go to the Kursk Oblast as a first place, the sector up here. We can see that the Russians are having successes in both the west and the east, although slightly less in the east around the Surovikin area, as according to Surovikin maps, the pro-Russian mapper. Remember, the red pins represent where the previous Russian defensive lines were. It doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are standing the other side of that line. So that was where the Russians were defending up to, and then subsequently they've moved to this kind of orange line over here, as according to Surovikin map. So they've made that advance and they defend here, which means there'll be no man's land, and then the Ukrainians will be somewhat further, in this case, to the south and to the east. As far as Andrew Perpetua is concerned, only some small movements around these for Delkovo area there, with the Russians taking control of that small settlement by the looks of it. And then we come to the west, some small gains for the Russians there. But over a 5-day period, it doesn't seem to have shifted too much. It is worrying that the Russians are pushing back in the Kursk Oblast, as it is when they push forward everywhere on the map. When we come to the Kharkiv direction, in the Vovchansk area, according to Surovikin map, some slight gains for the Russians potentially, although I'm not 100% sure. It could be some weird glitches of the pins, because they appear to be on the line there, or just a single one off the line there, so not really sure. Might be a bit of movement there, but no other sources indicate that is the case in the Vovchansk area. We have Greyskull saying actually in the Kursk area that the Ukrainians made yesterday some gains, or their reported gains, in the Chukassi-Konopjelka region. If we just go back to there, sorry, I did forget to mention that. Chukassi-Konopjelka is up. We got Chukassi-Perechnoye there. Yeah, here we are. Chukasskaya-Konopjelka there. Yeah, it depends how it's transcribed. So interesting that in that same area, one source is saying that Ukrainians have made advances, and the pro-Russian source here, Surovikin map, saying the Russians have made advances there. Surovikin maps generally aligns with the MOD. So the MOD, the Russian MOD, claim that there is an advance there. We'll just put that on the map unquestioningly. So yeah, take that with a pinch of salt and all that. When we come up to the northeastern sector, there's interesting that there are some gains across the Oskil River, right up near the border at a place called Topoli, according to Surovikin maps, and that's a worry for the Ukrainians, because the Russians have been pushing so much down here around Dvorichna. Andrew Perpetua has some marginal gains just up really to the river there in one area around there, but no changes to that area otherwise. Whereas actually for the Institute for the Study of War, they do say that there are gains in the Kupyansk direction. Around here you can see there's fighting, so that's where we've just looked at. But interesting that they say up here, I'm just going to zoom in, a Russian source claimed on February the 22nd that Russian troops seized Topoli. That's not been confirmed by the ISW, but like I said, Surovikin maps, if their claim is there, they will put it in. It might be true. Geolocated footage posted on February the 2nd indicates Russian forces advance to Centralna Street in central Topoli, so there is some geolocated evidence to suggest that as well. And then some fighting south of the what I call the Pistchani sector there as well. So we're going to have a look at that in a second. Bit of gain here around well, south of, I guess, Velyka, south east of Velyka there, east of Petropavlivka, which is itself east of Kupyansk. So some small gains according to Surat Maps there. And then when we come down to, interesting that Surat Maps has some gains for the Ukrainians, marginal gains, could be just shifting the lines a little bit around this Krulhi area. Just wondering if that's where they're talking about here. I'm pretty sure that is exactly this area where there is fighting. So good to see that the Ukrainians have made some small gains, perhaps, or just changing the mapping. On the other hand, the Russians making a couple of fields of gain further to the south. And then quite a bit going on around the area south of Makivka, Balkozhiravka, and Terny-Torska area. The Russians making some fairly decent gains over the last 5 days, according to Surat Max, taking control of Novoselivske there, which is, if it's true, then I say that's obviously not great for the Ukrainians. I don't really think this area here has too much like intrinsic value. So I would rather the Russians, make loads of effort to take all this area, but actually struggle elsewhere. But they are making gains in Chesivyar as well, as the Institute for the Study of War maintained. Andrew Perpetua is catching up with Surat Maps there, with some gains from the fields south of Ivanivska as they've moved along this T0504 highway and are really having some success moving along there towards Konstantinivka, approaching Topoli. No changes to the centre of Chesivyar, but north of it, around Nyzhne, the Russians making some gains there, according to both mappers. So that's not great, but actually, I say I don't mind because they're not losing Chesivyar, but actually the theory is that they're not so bothered about Chesivyar. They just need to move down the highway towards Konstantinivka, because really this is what they want. Chesivyar itself is just merely a buffer zone for Konstantinivka, which is then part of this semicircle of settlements, cities, towns, whatever you want to call them, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Konstantinivka. That's really what they want. Right, some gains here around Toretsk. Interesting that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back towards Leonidivka. We have here actually some claims about that here. Pro-Ukrainian channel reports that the AFU counterattacked in the Novosilske area and entered Leonidivka. You can see here that the mapping is considerably different, with the Russians. I suppose if you talk about the top of that tailings heap, that's where they're up to there, and then they push back by the side of the road. So there's a quite big difference here, because Greyskull has all of that's been retaken by the Ukrainians. And possibly looking very different around there, with a bit of a nodule of Russian, although that's the area that Surat Maps is saying actually the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back in. So it could be that, if you were to combine both these maps favorably for Ukraine, they've retaken this area and retaken that area. And it's interesting that the Ukrainians seem to be pushing back. They've done that fairly consistently over the last mapping update and maybe a bit further. So the pushing back there. There are some areas along this Prokofiev front, getting close to Prokofiev, where the Ukrainians have either pushed back or there's been some mapping rejigs. Well, it's interesting here, actually. Both mappers had the Russians in control of that junction, so that would have been pushing them back, actually, because there was geolocated evidence. There has been that this has been well within the grey zone, the Russians pushing up there, being repelled, and then pushing up there and taking it, and now it appears that they've lost that junction. But they have gained some area around here, according to Andrew Perpetua, more in line with what Surat Maps have broadly been saying. But Chesivyar possibly pushing the Russians further to the south there, although one mapper says one thing and the other says the other. Surat Maps saying that the Russians are pushed forward into Lysivka, and Andrew Perpetua saying the Ukrainians are pushed forward just to the east of there. So I don't know, confusing stuff there. And here, Surat maps indicating that the Russians have pushed back in Kotlyna, taking control back of that settlement and having some joy there. I don't know. I'd imagine it's probably grey zone pretty much there. And then south of there, the Russians doing quite a lot of movement on the way down to Kharkiv, taking a whole series of fields. They've had success in Sribna, into the village of Zaporizhia. The actual name of the village there, Zaporizhia. This has been an area of their success over the last sort of week or so, but also further to the southeast. And then Andriivka, mainly under their control, is the claim that we're hearing. And Andriivka is quite a major place. As you can see, it's much larger than some of the villages we've been otherwise talking about. That is a real success for the Russians to have taken that. That is was a logistical hub, and they've kind of filled in all the gaps there now around Kharkiv. As expected, they've kind of equalised this front line. The question is, how far are they going to push? They're also pushing in Velyka Novosilka area as well, having some joy, pushing the Ukrainians further to the west and north in that particular area, both north and directly west of Velyka Novosilka, which is there on that meandering river as it comes down through places like Neshkuchna, Uruzhany, and all that. God, you remember they were fighting over Uruzhany? God, it seems like a long time ago, and it's quite a bit of land that the Russians have taken back there. So the Russians have had a little bit more accelerated success, I think, in the last mapping update than previously, but certainly nothing like they were having previous to that, sort of the end of last year and into January. But it is still worrying around here, around the Kharkiv area, really moving in this sector quite successfully. There is one more here claim, the Avdiivka axis, Prokofiev axis, the settlement of Lysivka. So that is going back to where I was talking about. That is this area there, and that interesting. Well, that goes back to what I was saying. Andrew Perpetua saying to the east of Lysivka, the Ukrainians have done a counterattack, but Lysivka itself, the Russians have taken control. Well, actually, that's against what Astri Intel is saying, that actually that settlement, the Russians have been pushed out of there. So it could be that in reality should be a set of blue pins there. So good news for the Ukrainians, and that would make more sense of the other data as well if both of those were the same kind of color. But nonetheless, that's focusing on the positives for Ukraine. Really, they are struggling a lot in the Kharkiv area and Velyka Novosilka area. Some small gains as well, just to the east of Kamyanka at Piatichatki. I haven't said that name for a long time. Sherebianki and Piatichatki. The Russians taking some small gains there, but a little bit of a worry for the Ukrainians, that would be too. There were some rumours from, I don't know if they're rumours, one of the Russian mill bloggers, Two Majors, who is fairly, you pay attention to him, saying that the Russians could make an attack across the river here. I don't know, it could just be a bit of a psyops, and I think it would be pretty suicidal if they did that. That's Frontline over the last 5 days. Hopefully that was of use. Bit of a quick one, which is probably good for you guys, as there's an awful lot of content coming out. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your support. And if you do want to help out with the campaign we are doing for DZYGA'S Poor, please click on the link below. The link below, if I get it right, might also fill some of what I'm just about to tell you. But if you do click on this, we're doing really well, almost at $8,000 over the last couple of days. If you press the donate button, please remember to copy the ATP for Try comment, so you can press that and it copies it to your clipboard, and then put it in whatever reference box you can find when you do the payment, and then they can attribute that donation to our campaign rather than going in the general pot. So that's really important in order for your donation to help with this campaign. Thank you very much for listening and watching this update, and as I say, please help with the thermal drone fundraiser for these Mavic 3Ts thermals. That's fantastic. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.